This episode of the Feed Podcast is brought to you by the Chicago French Market. The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
You're listening to the Feed Podcast. To get your weekly fix, subscribe to us on iTunes or visit our website, thefeedpodcast.com.
Well, as elemental as bread is, flour, water, yeast, salt, I never knew it could be this complex. I mean, let's talk about...
I always talk to people in culinary school, and when they get to their bread baking section, they go, oh my God, it's like 4 ingredients. And there are people that make their whole careers on 4 ingredients because you can do so many things with it. Right. Of course, you can have additives to it, but no, you can really manipulate flour, water, yeast, and salt in the most incredible ways.
Talk about microbiology, talk about science, talk about technique, talk about creativity. I mean,
Right.
It all comes together, and it's such an elemental thing that we all sort of, I think, take for granted.
We do, and we don't even think about it, and I'm really glad that some of the better restaurants now are actually charging for bread because it takes so much time and attention from the kitchen, and making a bread course, like you stop and think about bread in a really different way when you have it as a course with some amazing butter.
There was outcry, I remember, in Chicago years ago. I think lettuce said they're going to charge for bread,
Right.
And people are like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Bread should come for free. Part of that?
It shouldn't. It shouldn't come for free.
Well, coming up on today's show, a chat with the co-author of the impressive and massive new Modernist Bread cookbook, which is really 5 volumes loaded with technique, history, and science. Eye candy and practical knowledge for the amateur baker, but also a comprehensive understanding of one of the kitchen's most elemental components for the professional as well. Stay with us. We're all about kneading, leavening, proofing, and fermentation today, so make sure your salted butter is room temp and spreadable. This is the Feed Podcast. I'm Steve Dolinsky, a food and travel reporter at ABC 7 News, the Chicago Tribune, and Canada's Globe and Mail.
And I'm Rick Bayless, the chef and owner of Chicago's Frontera Grill, Topolobampo, Choco Leña Brava, and host of Public Television's Mexico One Plate at a Time.
And every week, the Feed takes a deep dive into the world of professional chefs, restaurateurs, food artisans, and drink experts, sharing their stories and uncovering their passion for food and drink. But that's not all. Rick and I are always traveling the globe for our jobs, eating, drinking, and immersing ourselves in the local culture. And if we find something exciting along the way, you can be sure it's going to find its way here to our James Beard Award-winning podcast. Well, when Nathan Mhyrvold decides to tackle something, he goes all the way and as deep as possible. The former chief technology officer at Microsoft and culinary school graduate released Modernist Cuisine 6 years ago, a multi-volume compendium of the science and technique behind cooking, full of mind-blowing photographs. The project took 3 years to produce and wound up selling more than 220,000 copies, translated into 9 languages. A few years later, he recruited a team of more than 20 full-time professionals to work on his next major project, all about bread. He hired pastry chef Francisco Migoya, who had worked for Thomas Keller at the French Laundry in Bouchon, then went on to become a professor teaching baking and pastry to students at the Culinary Institute of America for 9 years. Migoya and his team spent nearly 4 years working on this project, baking more than, get this, 36,000 loaves, resulting in more than 2,600 pages over 5 volumes. Not only the largest project on bread, but certainly the first to employ the use of a scanning electron microscope to do bread. And we are pleased to welcome the co-author of Modernist Bread today on the show, Francisco Migoya. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's really great to have you here, but I'm totally intimidated. I mean, it's like I bake bread at my house, and now, well, just going through the index alone for this volume, well, first of all, I was super excited. My heart started racing when I started looking at some of those things, and I just can't wait to delve deeply into it. But it's a little bit like a tidal wave of information that is all sitting there ready to just crash over your head.
Yeah, I mean, that's what 4 years in, like so many people like working on one project, that was, the outcome from that. But in reality, if just reading the material the instructions. That the point is to take that anxiety away from everybody. I mean, it's the idea is to have the tools, the informational tools, so that you can then just hop into the recipes. So.
When you were jumping into this, I mean, obviously you were excited about this project, as you said in the book. How did you even begin to get your head around where we're going to start with this?
Well, it's a great question, because my first question I had in my head that I never voiced out loud was to Nathan. In my mind, I was asking me, how are we going to write a book that is more than one volume when we're just talking about 4 ingredients? And 5 volumes later, and having to cut 600 recipes because they didn't fit into the book. It was almost, it seemed like unending how many things we could add to it, but we had to find a middle point. I had a lot of my recipes that I had developed throughout the years, but then we also developed new recipes for this book. And it turns out if you understand percentages and what ingredients do and how they interact with each other, you can invent your own bread.
I think you said in the book that just because something had worked for you in the past as a professional doesn't mean you weren't open to doing it a new way, if it made sense.
Right. And that is one of the biggest challenges with being a professional, is like you have these ways of doing things, and it's very hard to kind of divert from that because it's worked for you. And even if you see it work, it's very hard to change this thing that I've done all these years.
Well, because you've perfected it.
Right.
Yeah.
And
well, you think you've perfected it.
Exactly.
But then
that's a great way to put it.
If you can open yourself up to a different way of looking at it, you might find a new way to perfect something.
Right. And even when you get to that point, there's always going to be another better way to do it. There's always
So I'm curious, what did you discover? Like 1 or 2 things you discovered off the top of your head? Because you've got more than a decade of experience going in. What were some things that were just mind-blowing to you?
One of the things that people really need to take a look at is when you have a wild yeast starter, right? It's the French call it levain. In the U.S. we call it a leaven or a sour starter. Sure, there's yeast in it, but the majority of the microorganisms that are in there is lactic acid bacteria. In fact, they outnumber yeast 100 to 1. So the character of your sourdough bread is determined more for the lactic acid bacteria mix that is in there than the yeast that is actually fermenting the dough. So these are things that you wouldn't really know off the top of your head. You think of a sourdough starter, you think it's yeast, and that's all that is in there. But there's all this other stuff that gives each bread its own character. So that was one thing. The other, we performed 1,500 experiments in a period of 3 years. And so it really depends on, things that could be amazing to one person couldn't be to another. But for example, something that I really am a fan of is a technique we developed for keeping ingredients attached, like the toppings on a bagel, on the bagel. One of my biggest pet peeves is getting a bagel and half of it ends up either on your lap or in the napkin. And so we developed a method for keeping those really on the bagel. And just like that, we have a bunch of other techniques. So, I mean, when we were asking ourselves, what could we improve about this recipe? It had to do more with, is there a problem with the recipe and how it's made? Is it very complicated for, X, Y, or Z reasons, and how can we improve it?
And by using different icons, you can write to or appeal to a consumer, an amateur, or professional.
Right. And all of our recipes were tested for all of those environments, including there's an often neglected group of bakers, which are bakers who bake breads in restaurants, hotels, and like country club environments where it's not a professional bakery and it's not a home bakery. It's it's a different area. They use different ovens. They have different means of doing things.
They share a lot of equipment with the cooks on the line.
Right. And so who writes recipes for these folks, right? And so we put all of our recipes through the ringer, not just for professional bakers and home bakers, but also this segment of restaurant bakers. So those are different ovens. It's a different animal.
So I have to ask you, because there's a section here on making tortillas with nixtamalized grain.
Oh my God!
Talk to me.
This was so
I want to
awesome.
know because I thought this was just going to be wheat flour breads and
explain nixtamalized for people.
Okay, well, corn, when it is cooked in this alkali bath, it's mineral lime that's used for that. It changes the consistency of the corn, and it dissolves the outer hull of the corn. Now we're talking about grain corn, dried corn here, and it makes it into a corn that can be ground into a paste. So it doesn't look like a gruel when you cook it. It can actually be ground into a paste. And this is something that's been done in Mexico for thousands and thousands of years. But I saw that you tackled something about that. What did you discover? Because I haven't had a chance to go through all 5 volumes yet.
So it turns out you can nixtamalize pretty much any grain.
Right.
And so what we did it with rye. And,
okay.
emmer
and farro. So you cooked it in that
so
alkali bath. You
we cooked it in that.
Calcium oxide or hydroxide in this situation.
Yeah, we used cal in this case. And so after we put it through that, we basically made a mash out of it. Mm-hmm. And we put it in a tortilla press, pressed it down, and we cooked it on a comal.
And what did you get?
It was amazing because the actual tortilla was like a corn tortilla, but made out of rye.
Wow.
And it had the taste, that nixtamalized taste to it. But also what was amazing is that we could actually stretch it. When you just toast a tortilla, you can pull it and it stretches a little bit. So the rye, which is notorious for having very little to no gluten,
right,
it had this stretchiness to it. So then we made tacos with it, and it was fantastic.
You may in the future be seeing something like that on our menus here at Frontera.
And just the big picture here, I'm looking at the all volumes on their table now. So 1 is history and fundamentals, 2 is ingredients, 3 techniques and equipment, and then 4 and 5 are recipes.
Yes.
And you've got how many recipes in here,
we have
roughly?
1,200 recipes. Okay. 1,200 recipes. And
as with modernist cuisine, there's a separate loose leaf a kitchen manual, they call it here, that you can actually take into the kitchen because these books are stunningly beautiful. And
the photography, the equipment you guys use, it's just the fact you had 20 plus people working on this full time.
Right. Yeah, there's 5 chefs in the kitchen. Actually, we're 4 now. Ironically, the kitchen staff is probably the smallest area because we also have we have our PR marketing team, we have our photographers, which are amazing, and then we self-publish. So we decide when we're going to publish and when it's ready. So that's a huge privilege.
Some of the photos, you're looking at like the inside of a ciabatta or some artisanal bread, and you see this open crumb structure, and it looks like a stalactite or something in a cave. It's just so intense and close and detailed.
Yeah. And you know what is really cool about that particular picture you're talking about is that you're looking at a beautiful picture, but it also explains a lot about bread, which bread is a gel. Mm-hmm. And you can see the thin membrane is like whenever you gel any starch, you add water to it, you cook it, it's this clear translucent film. And it explains it very well with the beautiful picture. Because when you have this like deep science, you have to explain it in a way that makes sense to a lot of people, but also in a way that visually makes sense.
Well, you're going to explain some more to us coming up because we're going to take a short break, but coming up, we're going to continue our conversation with Francisco Migoya as he talks specifically about a bread and butter combo that will resonate with Rick, since the bread is made from Huitlacoche and the butter contains mole. Then later, a very unique tasting. Stay with us.
Check out previous episodes, get recipes from ingredient challenges, and see behind-the-scenes pictures at thefeedpodcast.com.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
I'm Mark from Street Smoke and Steam. We serve various international street food, and we're focused mainly on certain proteins with skewered meats, all very well marinated and freshly prepared, cooked to order. Our best seller so far has been the Xinjiang lamb. It's a very popular lamb dish from northwest China. It's a kind of heavy cumin chili powder spice blend with a nice marinade on there as well, so it kind of takes out any of that gaminess from the lamb.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat. That's
very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got 2 entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
You're listening to the Feed Podcast. Get the inside scoop by following us on Twitter The Feed Podcast.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We're talking with Francisco Migoya today, the co-author of Modernist Bread, a 5-volume cookbook about the science and technique of bread baking. You've brought along some bread for us today, I can see. Now, this doesn't look like sort of what I would expect most people would think of a beautiful loaf of bread because, number one, there are corn husks on the outside wrapping it up, and then it's a dark color, almost chocolate brown color. Tell us, what do we have here?
So this is based on our master sourdough recipe, and we have a section in our book in which we add purees to breads. And it varies from bread to bread. Sourdoughs can take a certain kind of purees, bagels can take a different kind of purees, and so on and so forth. So for me, it was important to have this particular flavor added to a sourdough, which is Huitlacoche, because...
so let's explain what Huitlacoche is. It's this
corn smut.
Corn smut. It's this mushroom. Yeah, it's the worst name ever, but it's a mushroom-like thing that grows within the kernel of corn. So it looks like the kernel of corn has elephantitis, and it turns this sort of really beautiful. It turns this jet black color, and it tastes slightly sweet, slightly corny, and very earthy.
Yes, and it has that, like you said, it has that flavor, which even a little bit goes a long way, and it also has that color, which makes it super dramatic. So we have that mixed into the sourdough, but we also have another technique here, which is what we, one of the things about whole wheat breads is that when you use whole wheat flour, these breads turn out usually very dense. And the reason for that is because bran and germ really love water, and so you need to add like all this water to the dough. Also, bran and germ kill the volume of the bread because of enzymes that are present in it. So what we did is we kind of reverse engineered the flour, and what we did is we mix, this particular dough is mixed without bran and germ. We basically calculate how much of, let's say if this is 1,000 grams of flour, how much bran and germ would it have if it was whole wheat flour? And so basically we add that much bran and germ to it, but we mix it in after the dough has already developed some gluten. So what we do is we toast it, we soak it in water, because bran and germ love to soak up water. But if you add the water ahead of time, it won't be stealing the water from the dough. And then we mix it into the dough just until it's just incorporated, and then we finish mixing it by performing folds, which is another way. You don't have to mix it all in the mixer. If you do that, if you do it by hand, it turns out a lot nicer. It's a lot more gentler on the dough. So what this does is it gives us this really open crumb structure, which typically you never see with whole wheat bread. So we have a couple of techniques here which are really cool, which is adding the Huitlacoche puree, is adding the bran and germ and making a light, fluffy loaf, if you will.
Right. And when did you add the Huitlacoche puree?
Right at the beginning.
Oh, at the beginning.
Right at the beginning.
Okay.
So it's an integral part of the dough just from the beginning. But then we also bake it. What I do is I line the basket with corn husks. I soak them first, and then I line the basket with the corn husks for the dough to proofen it, and then it bakes with the corn husks around it. And so that gives it a particular aroma, gives it a particular taste. Obviously, you take it off because it's not something that you would eat, but it's more of an aromatic component. So it's kind of like a tamal idea behind how this was baked.
And just to garnish this as well, or is there some? Or no, you're taking off the string.
Yeah, I'm taking out the string. So the reason for this is so that we can just take the corn husks off, and I can slice into the bread. So.
It's a really stunningly beautiful loaf, just because of the darkness of it, and of course with the corn husk on the outside. That's really dramatic.
And we will have pictures, of course, on our website, The Feed Podcast, and our Facebook page, The Feed Podcast.
You can also see how the corn husk just leaves that pattern on.
Yeah, it's embedded in the outside of it. Okay. So long serrated knife here.
Yeah. So you see you have typically with whole wheat breads, what you have is a very tight crumb. And here what you have is this very moist looking, very springy dough. And then I also added some, like after I added the puree, I also added some corn, but also Huitlacoche confit, which I have some of right here.
Yeah, where did you get your Huitlacoche?
There's a lady in Oregon who does it for us, and so she basically, when she harvests it, she flash freezes it and she sends it to us frozen. So.
And is she doing wild inoculated, or is she inoculating herself?
These are wild inoculated. These are basically farmers were she saw a market. Farmers were throwing it away, and she's like,
Are you giving Rick a new source for his Huitlacoche?
Absolutely,
possibly?
I'm happy to share it.
Okay, so you slice this up, and now you're going to put. What did you say you're going to put it on it?
So I have a mole butter. Basically, it's a mole that we're going to have that we mix with butter. Essentially, mole is a paste. It's a smooth paste, and it mixes super easily with butter. And so what we're going to do is we're going to top it with some sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds. This is Huitlacoche Confit, which is basically Huitlacoche cooked in oil with jalapenos, and it's just cooked in a pressure cooker. So
this is like mother's milk for Rick, right? You're loving this, aren't you?
You can tell. I'm actually pulling out my phone to take pictures of every step along the way here.
Really cool. Okay, so a pastry bag now with a kind of a flat tip, or
this is typically bakers use this to make like buttercream roses, but we're going to use it to.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful display. Okay, so again, more pictures, go to our website or go to our Facebook page, The Feed Podcast. We'll make sure we have pictures of this beautiful mole butter. And I'm guessing all these recipes are in Modernist cuisine.
Yes.
Modernist bread, yep, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, and then on that confit, this is the Huitlacoche confit. No, sesame seeds?
Sesame seeds, these are toasted sesame seeds.
And then pumpkin seeds?
You typically mole, as you know, you put a little bit of sesame seeds on top, and then, these are pumpkin seeds, also toasted.
You've got a bunch of salt here as well,
What kind of salt do you have?
This is Malden.
Here? Malden.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. My favorite, light flake salt.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite too. It's it just breaks up so easily, and and then this is a Huitlacoche confit. So it's cooked in the oil, and we're just going to take a little bit of it out.
Now, you said you did it in a pressure cooker.
Yes.
Why would you choose a pressure cooker versus just using a sort of low temperature on stovetop?
A pressure cooker is going to help to create that vacuum once it comes out, because when you're cooking anything with a pressure cooker, you're basically, the steam in and of itself is what is called superheated steam, which is steam that gets hotter than steam. So it's 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically what you're doing is if you're doing a confit and you're cooking something that has, the spores from the fungus, you want to make sure that anything that's alive in there is not going to be alive anymore. So it preserves it for a long period of time.
All right, so listen, as you finish up this garnish, we are going to take one more break, and when we come back, Francisco is going to let us taste this unique combination. Then Rick and I are going to wrap things up. Plus, we'll preview some scenes from next week's show, so stay with us.
Beef with something you heard? Looking for a little extra side dish? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at The Feed Podcast.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
I'm Sean Mulroney with Santos Pizza. We're a New York slice pizza place. We do 4 pizzas every day, our standard pizza, and then we do a special each day. We also do Italian beef, some other sandwiches, and it's gosh darn good.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, I mean, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat.
That's very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got 2 entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
See photos, get links to previous stories, or just let us know what you think. Contact us on our website, thefeedpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are talking with Francisco Migoya today, the co-author of Modernist Bread, a 2,600-page, 5-volume tome that digs deeper into the subject of bread than anything ever produced. And you've brought along some bread and butter with you, as you talked about in our last segment. Not just any bread and butter. This is like way beyond. Wow. So it's the.
Do I finally get to eat?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's got some Huitlacoche whipped into this, blended into this.
Everybody has to go to the website and look at these photos because this is really beautiful.
Gorgeous. All right, so. Oh, my goodness.
I am really in heaven now. Wow. So
this is like Topolo.
That exactly.
Course 2,
mole,
right? Yeah.
mole butter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you really get the flavor, that reduced flavor of mole. Infusing that butter in such a beautiful way. You get the little sweet elements from the fruit in the mole. You get the boldness of the chilies. Of course, there's sesame seeds and pumpkin seeds on the top, so that's really reinforced. But then what I'm really taken with is that confit of the Huitlacoche that you put on top of it, because the Huitlacoche, as you emphasized, is preserved in such a beautiful way. I've never had Huitlacoche so beautifully preserved.
But I am taken with the bread, and I think it's because you talked about the moisture amount in this. I looked at that bread on the outside, and I thought, dense, hard, dark, almost like a Scandinavian
like
bread,
a rye bread,
like a rye. And you cut into this, and I'm eating this, and it's tender. There's what a complexity, or there's air pockets in here, right? Because of all that moisture.
The moisture, but also the yeast and lactic acid bacteria going to town on it. So.
Well, and I have to say, now this is what you would call a super hydrated bread, right?
Yeah, this is like 110% hydration.
110%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's more water than flour.
And how does that compare to like a tartine bread? Like, I know there's a lot of moisture in those nice breads.
I think he goes to 95%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it gives a very interesting moistness to the bread. It doesn't taste soggy in any way. Right. It just, I don't know, it tastes a little bit more pudding-like, if you will.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like this gel.
It's the gel.
Yeah.
It's the gel part of it. It's really
the mole butter is so good.
It's so good.
That's super easy.
Wow.
I mean, it's like it's a third butter.
If you have a really good mole paste.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
because Doña Maria in the jar is not going to produce this quality.
Right. No, we made this mole from
scratch.
Yeah.
So, no, it's really beautiful.
It does make a huge difference, as you know.
So what are you going to master next? You've mastered bread now. What's next for you?
You know, it's funny because it's one of those things that, people ask me, well, what did you learn from this book? And it's like, I learned that I don't know anything about bread.
Which is incredible. You were teaching for 9 years and you worked for Thomas Keller.
All right. Well, it's just the more you know about something, it's like, man, I keep learning and learning and learning. So I think that, for now we're just going to kick back and just really absorb what this book means to us and what we're going to be working on next. We have 10 projects up in the air, all books. It looks like our next book is, we don't know what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be a smaller book.
A smaller, not 5 volumes? Oh, I can't imagine. No. Oh, wait, no, I have to ask you. I intended to ask you this from the very beginning. Is there going to be a modernist bread at home like you did modernist cuisine at home?
It's in one of the possible things that might happen. It's not out of the question.
Because honestly, I have that at home, and I work in that book a lot more than I do the 5 volumes that I have right over here on the shelf of our library.
It is a possibility, and it's whether it's going to happen sooner in 5 years. It's we don't know yet because we literally don't know yet.
This is so remarkable. I can't wait to delve into it. This is right up my alley.
Yep. The book, I should say books again, plus the manual is called Modernist Bread. Francisco Magoya, thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for bringing this
an honor for me. Thank you so much.
All right, well, coming up next week, how to live a bit healthier in the new year.
They're interested in health foods, they're interested in juicing, they're interested in smoothies and vegetarian, vegan, the trendy stuff, but also just, taking care of their bodies.
We're not talking about drastic changes to diet and exercise, but rather a few easy, gradual changes that you can make to live a bit healthier in 2018. That's next week on the show. You can always contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Feed Podcast. Check out our ingredient challenges and get recipes and other information about previous shows by simply visiting our website, thefeedpodcast.com. And please subscribe and rate our show on iTunes. Be sure to follow me at Rick_Bayless.
And I'm at Steve Dolinsky. We're in the Apple Podcast section, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, pretty much everywhere. More information about the books we talked about on our website as well. Linnea Dominic's our intern. Max Dolinsky supervised today's music. Bureaucratic wrote and performed our theme song. And the Feed Podcast is edited by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Whether you're an individual or institution, get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.